There's birds. There are birds!
Hey guys, welcome back to a bonus episode of the Dr. Cliff Show. We have a special guest here today, Mike Housholder from xMEMS. They create silicon speakers and silicon vents. You do not want to miss this episode coming right up. Tell us about really conceptualization of the MEMS speaker. Because we're familiar with MEMS microphones from years ago and how those replaced electric microphones inside of hearing aids. So what's going on with the speaker side of things?
I mean, starting from the fundamentals, MEMS technology, microelectrical mechanical systems, really hard to say, it's a mouthful. But
I like the abbreviation better, yeah.
MEMS is much easier. But I mean, essentially, the concept is they're just microscopic moving structures inside of a chip. And most MEMS innovation over the past 20, 30 years has been around sensing. Sensing pressure, sensing sound for microphones, sensing motion, gyroscopes and accelerometers, endless applications. Now we're kind of moving into a new generation of MEMS that is all about transduction and actuation. So instead of waiting for a stimulus and sensing it, we're actually now producing. Really what this is and what we sought out to do was use this new generation of MEMS with piezo materials to try to move these structures in a way where we could move air and generate really high quality sound.
And when you say piezo, what do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so these are piezo materials that they have a property called the piezoelectric effect. You apply a voltage to them and the material property bends. So that's our actuation, where a conventional speaker uses a coil and a magnet to move a diaphragm up and down. We're using a thin film in the semiconductor sandwich to basically move these MEMS structures up and down.
So when we talk about solid state speakers, that's what we're specifically talking about with a MEMS speaker, right?
Yeah, and really the approach we took was solid state. There are some hybrid approaches out there where they've got a MEMS actuator attached to a traditional speaker. We know that there's just a natural gravitational pull in electronics for solid state components. So
you might know that.
Yeah, well,
I was gonna say.
This is a first for me.
Yeah, so there's good examples. The MEMS microphone one. I mean, most people don't know that the Electret or ECM microphone was the microphone for decades until a MEMS variant came along that was all silicon, and now it dominates unit volumes. If we look at data storage, hard drives, mechanical hard drives with spinning disks. Now we have solid state drives that don't move. It's just solid state semiconductor electronics. And now that dominates market share. So really the speaker is next. It's the last mechanical component in consumer electronics devices that hasn't gone solid state. And that's our journey, to replace the motor with piezo actuation and then replace the diaphragm that is moving the air. Instead of that being paper or plastic, now it's silicon.
And so what are some of the other benefits of that? So like just looking at the silicone properties of a MEMS speaker, no warping, right? That was something that we were talking about with MEMS microphones, is that you'd get something called microphone drift, where the microphones would start warping over the course of time, and then your directionality and all that was thrown off. So I imagine that's one of the big benefits of doing that with a speaker as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's the benefits are quite numerous. If we categorize them into benefits to the manufacturer, benefits to the consumer, to the manufacturer, a solid state component just is inherently more consistent and uniform. Every speaker we produce is exactly the same. You don't have any mechanical variance as these things are assembled. They're just natively the same out of the semiconductor fab. Reliability, solid state components are more reliable. So as through consumer wear and tear, they're just going to be more robust over time. And we've also removed the magnet. So we've taken weight out. We've solved electromagnetic interference with Bluetooth radios. Those are benefits to the manufacturer.
Yeah.
Now to the consumer, okay, does it sound better? And the answer is yes.
Right. I mean, that's pretty much all they care about, right?
It sounds good. They'll put it in their ears. So you said that the reliability and the longevity of the device is much better. So what would the comparison be, to something that we have more traditionally, that lifespan versus the lifespan of the MEMS speaker?
Yeah, good question. So we can look at it in terms of robustness. earbuds and hearing aids, they get dropped. We all have fumble fingers.
Right.
So they're more robust to mechanical stress and dropping, so the less prone to breakage. But also in terms of moisture and dust, these are IP58 rated.
Okay.
So moisture resistant, particulate resistant. And we even have some of our consumer electronics customers asking us to do washer dryer tests.
Oh, nice.
So leave your AirPod in your
pocket.
pocket, do some laundry. Can you survive a washer cycle and a high heat dryer cycle? These components can.
Yeah, well, you tested on yours first.
Well, and then too, if we're looking at application, down the road toward hearing aids, I cannot tell you how many hearing aids in my career thus far I've seen go through the washer and the dryer as well. So, I mean, if there's any hope of them withstanding something like that, long term, that would have a really awesome benefit, for what we're doing as well.
So that's, really on, so it's mechanical stress, it's water, dust, particulate, that's the robustness that you're going to get. And then on the does it sound better side, the answer is yes. But, that's really comes back to the solid state architecture, which is, the mechanical response of these speakers is about 150 times faster than a traditional speaker. So if you're really trying to produce detail and achieve separation and hear every little note in a song, or really get to really crystal clear wideband voice, these speakers can render that very accurately.
So now for the audiophiles out there who might be thinking about for their headphones listening to music, right? We think about having a lot of different, dynamic drivers inside of like in-ear monitors and things like that. And the more drivers you have, the better representation you can have. But you're able to achieve arguably, maybe not even arguably, better audio quality with a single speaker.
Yeah, I mean there's definitely some in the IEM space where one speaker has a weakness in a certain frequency range, so they patch it with another driver that's strong in that range, and you end up with a multi-driver earbud. And sometimes that's necessary to really render the highest quality audio, but that does create phase disturbances. And you've got to manage those phase disturbances to not muddy the audio or alter the audio artificially. It's always better to do it with one speaker. And what we've built with the speed and the phase accuracy and the phase consistency of the speaker, you can take a 20 balanced armature IEM and shrink that down to a single MEMS driver.
Yeah.
So reduce the complexity, reduce the cost, and avoid any of those phase disturbances from these multi-speaker architectures.
And so we work obviously primarily more in the hearing care space.
Single driver.
So right,
Right,
exactly.
exactly.
And so let's talk about that a little bit more and kind of the direction that you guys have taken with the approach to kind of launching this technology initially through the consumer market and now hopefully targeting more of the prescription hearing aid manufacturer market. Like, talk us through that evolution of everything.
Sure. I mean, I think again, we think we've built a fantastic speaker with a lot of great qualities. Now, how does that appeal to the hearing health community? What we hope the manufacturers see in our product, and many of them are, is again they're benefiting from the small size. Balanced armatures have dominated this space because of their small size, and they can get deep in canal. Well, we've matched that size with these MEMS speakers, so we've been able to achieve that small size. In terms of response, we have a wider bandwidth speaker that isn't really tuned to voice frequencies. With hearing aids going Bluetooth, it's not about just voice amplification, it's media amplification. You need a single driver wide bandwidth speaker that can produce all this rich content. And you want something that can do that, very linearly, smoothly, very accurately, without a lot of resonant peaks and valleys that need to be managed acoustically or electrically. So, we think we've built something more attuned to this new generation of Bluetooth connected.
If I remember looking at some of the slides when we had our first conversation, it almost looked like your guys' stuff was half the size of the traditional armatures that are used inside of hearing aid receivers right now.
Yeah, I mean we've pretty much matched the X and Y dimension, the length and the width of a balanced armature, but we're a fraction of the height.
Yeah.
So we can definitely squeeze this into an even smaller space. If you wanted to entertain the possibility of doing stacking these drivers to get additional loudness.
Right.
You could
Yeah.
stack them and still fit in the same profile of a single balanced tone.
Yeah, interesting. That makes me think of, when we have these hearing aids, we have different power levels of the receiver. So, you go standard, medium, power, super power, ultra power, right, and everything in between. Can you replicate the output of all of those with a single one, or were you talking like once you start getting into the super power and ultra power, you're starting to potentially stack them?
The only reason to stack them is if you need higher SPL.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you're going to get. So you wouldn't kind of woof or tweeter it. You wouldn't divide up the frequency ranges. You would stack them to get more overall loudness.
This would be a compounding effect with it.
Yeah. But again, it really depends on what frequency range you're trying to target. And again, with the piezo speakers, they have a unique property that above 800 hertz, they basically just have a linear gain out north of 10 kilohertz.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you've got that natural gain built in for those extended high frequencies that you should benefit from without really having to deal with resonances or trying to target a driver to a particular frequency range. You've got enough SPL in those higher frequencies.
The thing that bothers me is that when you get someone who has more of a severe to profound level of hearing loss, you think that you go bigger on the receiver size and you're going to get more gain out in the high frequencies, and it's actually kind of the opposite, right? Once you make that larger and larger, you actually lose the ability to target the high frequencies. So how does that work with the solid state speaker?
Yeah, I mean, with our linear gain, again, we'll be typically north of 130, 140 dB out at 10 kilohertz. And then we're pretty much flat out to 80 kilohertz. Again, you don't really care about 80 kilohertz, but
Right.
I don't know. My dog has hearing loss, so
just to show the capability of the speaker, right? Once you hit about 10K, you'll just be flat, all the way out into the ultrasonics, which again, probably not a relevant application, but just gives you a sense for the technology.
yeah.
I think we've also been a little bit conditioned in that maybe it's not a relevant, frequency range out beyond 8,000 hertz. However, one of the biggest complaints about hearing aids is that they don't have this great natural audio quality, and part of that is because once you get out into those higher frequencies, you don't have the amount of gain proportionate to the hearing loss, but also to just how the world in and of itself is sounding. And human beings do have the capability of hearing out to 20,000 hertz, and so even though we haven't thought about it as necessary for hearing and understanding speech, it still has the application in that if we can make hearing aids sound even more natural because we can go into those higher frequencies as well, does that also then increase things like hearing aid adoption rate and those kinds of things, because we're not having this more computerized speaker sounding effect?
Yeah, and I think it's obviously a very individual problem, and it's highly variable. But I've read some studies that there are some harmonics in the extended high frequencies that can lend themselves to improve speech and noise.
Yeah.
And again, that's going to vary person to person, but having that headroom in the extended high frequencies should help a proportion of the audience.
Well, I can't reference the exact article, but I know that there was a study done where they actually used filters to kind of filter out everything below, I don't know, 3,000 hertz or everything below 6,000 hertz. I don't remember what it was, and only gave the high frequencies above that. And people's speech intelligibility was still really good, hitting these really high frequencies. And so my goal as an audiologist is I'm always trying to hit the highest frequency that I possibly can when doing verification on patients with hearing aids. And the thing that goes against that is whether we're venting or not venting them, right? So like if you have no venting, you can trap more sound pressure inside the ear canal, hit out to a higher frequency prescriptive target. But the problem with that is that if they have good low frequency hearing, now you're creating different things like insertion loss and occlusion effect, which are not a good thing. There's a dynamic vent that you guys have as well that I do want to make sure that we talk about that could potentially solve that problem.
We introduced a product called Skyline that uses the same process and the same technology as our speakers, but isn't trying to produce sound, but it's basically, to simplify it, it's a barn door that can be dynamically opened or closed to mitigate occlusion effects or to improve passive noise isolation when the situation warrants it.
Right. And so right now there is a manufacturer that's out there that does an active vent type approach with it, but you hear the clicking of the vent opening and shutting. How does this Skyline vent function from that standpoint?
Completely inaudible.
Yeah.
So again, the benefit of this piezo MEMS solid state technology, inaudible open and close, and then you've got all the robustness that we just talked about with the speakers. So highly robust to moisture, to particulate. So this thing will be robust over the life of the product.
And what's the name of the MEMS? Is it Montana? There's 3 of them, right?
Yeah, so there's Montera.
Yeah.
That was our first product. The product that is getting the most attention in the hearing aid space is a product we call Cowl, because that's our smallest speaker.
Okay.
So for anything receiver and canal, we can get very deep insertion with the smallest size. So Cowl's probably the optimal speaker for the hearing health space. But then we've got our largest output speaker right now, which is Montera Plus, and that again that's the highest output that all the hi-fi guys are going after.
Nice. Okay. So the stuff that we were actually listening to a little earlier, what were we listening to?
That was Montera Plus.
Okay.
So
Cool.
That's the hi-fi speaker.
Yeah. So you guys don't know, but we were rocking out a little bit to music before we started hitting record, and it's rather impressive. So let's talk about that here a little bit. Dr. Beck, you had brought your AirPods Pro 2, which are also my earbuds of choice when I'm listening to music or on calls and things like that. And so listening to those compared to listening to the Montera Plus was rather dramatic. I felt like the separation of the music and the notes and the lyrics and all that was much better with the solid state than it was with the Apple AirPods Pro 2. And it's a little disheartening because now I have to go back and listen to my AirPods Pro 2 consistently until I can get my hands on devices that are using
We'll give you a reason to upgrade.
Yeah, exactly. What was your perception of listening to that?
Well, and so for me, I sang for a very long time. I'm very in the live music space, and one of the things that I am very into is are different harmonies that exist when you have a group of people who are singing together. It is the thing that I've been obsessed with since I was probably 7 years old, and I put one of my favorite bands on. We were listening to it, and you can hear each distinct voice from one another. So harmonies are designed that you have not only the group that you can hear together as you're creating this, one sound together. But when you're at a live show, for example, you can hear that there are multiple people speaking, and you can hear some of their different, tones and things. And to have that also in a set of headphones, essentially, that you can experience, essentially a live concert, really is what it sounded like at home from the comfort of your couch was. I mean, you guys saw my reaction. I was just open now. It's incredible.
For hearing aid users, it's not just about better speech intelligibility, better separation of speech from background noise, things like that. But now that everybody has Bluetooth connectivity, Auracast is on the way inside of prescription hearing aids too. So having connectivity with listening to music and all that's important to them as well. So, you're able to kind of satisfy both of those at the same time.
That's the goal, and again, it just coming back to the solid state characteristics, the speed, no phase disturbance, and then really for the first time, we're using silicon as a speaker diaphragm. So that diaphragm is staying linear and not muddying the sound at any frequency, for any type of music. So you're really just getting the most honest sound you've ever heard.
Theoretically, could have a hearing aid manufacturer that chooses to use, a solid state silicone speaker like the MEMS speakers, and not use the venting side of things, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
They're separate parts.
Right. And so what happens to the frequency response with an open ear canal? Because I would say, I don't know, 90% of people being fit with hearing aids, I'm just pulling that literally out of the air, but 90% of people who are being fit with either completely open domes or vented to where there is a significant amount of leakage that's happening from their ear canal with sound. So what happens with the solid state speaker frequency response when that happens?
Yeah, so you're as with any speaker, when you do have an open fit, you're going to have a low frequency roll off. You're going to lose some of that low frequency energy. And that's typically, depends what that corner frequency is. It could start at 100 hertz or 200 hertz. You'll start to lose some of that deep bass. but everything 100 to 200 hertz and above is untouched.
Nice, even through the high frequencies.
Correct.
Nice. That.
So anything above 100, 200, completely unaffected.
Yeah. So that would be really nice. And then there's a question. Who posted? Was it you who posted a question yesterday about feedback control?
It was me who posed the question. So here's the thing: is that even the hearing aid receivers, the speakers that are inside of them now, they can get good high frequency responses. The challenge then is the feedback manager that exists within inside the hearing aid and their manufacturing, because there are some, you know, even now where I would fit a hearing aid that for a particular manufacturer, I know that I'm going to need a custom ear mold that's going to allow me to trap in some more of those high frequencies, even again if we run into some of those other challenges like occlusion effect or whatnot, because there's just their feedback manager does not exist in a way that it's going to allow me to get all of that good high frequency information, because it's going to leak back out of the hearing aid and it's going to recycle through the microphones and then create feedback or squealing.
Yeah. Yeah, so that gain before feedback that's going to be a problem with you know, every speaker is going to behave differently in that scenario. So we haven't gone, you know, deep enough with any of our. We've got customers working on this.
Right.
We haven't gone deep enough with them to know if they are encountering similar problems or if our speakers making this better in any way. So that's not something I'm prepared to speak to yet. But in conjunction with the vent, once you do have control over ambient, and this is analog control, so you can open it wide, you can open it a little, you can completely close it. You know, controlling that ambient may help that situation.
And so when you say controlling the ambient, you're talking about the venting side of it, correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
the openness.
Yes. Perfect.
So it's kind of interesting because you've said analog a few times with this, and you know, audiophiles out there would say analog is better than digitally reproduced sound, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about, you know, analog sound here, technically speaking?
Technically speaking, I mean, the speaker itself is analog, the circuitry is analog.
Yeah.
We're doing no digitization.
So there's a lot of, I would say, old school hearing aid users that, you know, either grew up on analog technology or whatnot, and they hate digital sound reproduction. So theoretically, we could be going back to now having more of an analog type amplification.
Yeah, I don't know if we're necessarily changing that, because you know the system processor in these hearing aids, you know, is unaware what speaker is producing the sound. So you still, whatever that processor is doing, may continue to do so.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see or have people who are diehard analog fans, you know, test it out and see if that aspect of using a MEMS speaker fixes whatever the issue is that they have with the sound. I do want to talk about power consumption too. Talk to us through that, if there's more power consumption, less power consumption, and what that would ultimately mean, because a lot of hearing aids nowadays, and the trend that you see is happening here, everythie's going rechargeable.
Yeah. The speaker itself is more efficient than a balanced armature. It's extremely efficient. But piezo is a voltage-driven architecture, so the amplification of this speaker is where we give back some of that efficiency. So this is really going to be kind of a multi-step approach. Where we're at today with our amplification, we're probably on par with a traditional dynamic speaker. So, you know, is this going to hit a medically critical 18-hour, you know, battery life hearing aid right out of the gate? Maybe not. But again, is that 18-hour, how much longer is that 18-hour of continuous fit required, versus are there going to be interim recharge cycles? So step one, I think where we're at today is we're definitely right in the sweet spot for a more casual use OTC type hearing aid that's, you know, more TWS like 6 hours, 8 hours, you know, maybe up to 8 or 10 hours, no problem. I wouldn't say today that we're ready for an all-day 18-hour product. But, you know, to show you where we're going, again, these speakers are essentially a large capacitor, a store of energy. And right now the amplifier is leaking all of that excess energy away. So now the next generation amplifier architecture, speakers unchanged. The next generation amplifiers will be able to take that excess energy out of the speaker and recycle it back to the battery.
That's
Wow.
crazy.
So then you're really going to have an extremely efficient speaker that will continue to just give back to the battery. Then that projection to that 18-hour all-day hearing aid is absolutely feasible. So we're kind of looking at the hearing aid market in phases,
Right.
depending on how our amplification technology comes along.
Very cool. Obviously, you've run demos with other people with this technology. Have you guys worked with anyone with actual hearing loss yet at this point?
For the shows that we go to, I mean, we're just getting random people from the public coming up and hearing these things, and they're disclosing to us that they're hearing aid users, and they're definitely excited by what they hear.
Nice.
We haven't gone to the step to quantify that,
Right.
but at least subjectively, we do have people with we do have hearing aid users listening to our technology. They're liking what they hear.
What about the people who are not hearing aid users, who may not have hearing loss, or at least they don't know they have hearing loss yet, who are just audiophiles? Like, what's their response been in general?
I mean, fantastic. So we in addition to the big consumer electronics guys, we do spend a lot of time at these audiophile shows, and we have people that'll walk up to our booth, with a $3,000 headphone rig on, and they'll say, "Well, I don't like earbuds. I'm more of a headphone guy."
Yeah.
Like, just give these a try.
Yeah.
Let me change your mind.
Well, I guess what would their reason behind that be? Is it like the physical fit, or is it they feel like they're better sound quality when they go over the
It could be a combination of sound quality or just general comfort or fit. Some people don't like things in their ears. But from the headphone community, the feedback we have is this is the first in-ear product that they felt had the space of a headphone.
Yeah,
I
can see that.
The music and the voice isn't in the head like in a typical in-ear earbud. It's out in space. So the spatial quality is much better with these speakers. And then anyone who is, an in-ear person, again, they're just astonished. It takes them about 3 to 5 seconds to hear something that surprises them. Just the detail, the clarity, or maybe a background instrument that they had never heard in their favorite track. They're hearing that detail and that clarity, unlike anything they've ever put in their ears.
He's a very rich voice.
There's birds in the back.
What?
There's
There
birds.
are birds? I'm sorry.
What?
Miss
There
Taylor.
are birds tweeting in the background.
I'm sorry.
I've never heard that in that song.
That's
Taylor
hilarious.
Allison Swift.
You're literally going to hear tweet, 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 flying away.
Very cool. I'm actually looking forward to when it starts coming out in actual hearing aids, and at some point, my prediction is that this is going to completely take over the prescription hearing aid world. Likely any device in the entire world that's going to use a speaker is naturally going to progress to go this route. I'm interested in seeing what the frequency response measured inside of someone's ear canal is, and how I can fit them, and how much different it is than a traditional fitting with the receivers that we currently use today. That'll be very interesting. But take us through, I guess, company-wise. Tell us about the actual company and
Sure.
who founded it. Where did it come from? Where was the idea of all this coming from?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the founding team, it's kind of an aggregation of MEMS technology experts and audio experts. Our CEO, who I worked with at a prior MEMS company, after we left that old MEMS company, he had started to dabble in audio a little bit, and saw what had happened with MEMS microphones, saw the evolution of these piezo materials, and said, maybe we can build a speaker. So the company was founded in 2018. I came on at the start of COVID 2020, when we were getting ready to actually launch a product into the market. But about 40% of the company comes from an old MEMS company called InventSense, where we're doing MEMS sensors. And now we're doing MEMS actuators.
What have the conversations been thus far, if you can talk about it, with some of the big 5 hearing aid manufacturers? Because a lot of the people who are watching this channel, they're interested in the hearing aid application side of it. We already have them all jazzed up for Auracast. They're like, when's Auracast coming? It's like, it's coming. But what have the conversations been like, if you can talk about it?
Sure. Obviously respecting confidentiality. There isn't both on the consumer side and the hearing aid side. There isn't a world leading brand in the world who doesn't have access to our technology right now. But they're all bringing the technology to market at different paces.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't speak to when the big five might launch a product with a MEMS speaker. I can say they have our technology in hand. They believe it's quite compelling. It's quite interesting. But to speak to their product plans right now,
I would imagine that it's a little bit more complex than just popping one of these inside one of their receivers, plugging it into their hearing aid, and having it work, right?
yeah, I wish it was.
Yeah, right.
That would make my job a lot easier. But no, I mean, the product development process is a complex process. They're trying to build a quality product. This is a new type of speaker, and they kind of have to take what they know about balanced armatures, for their entire careers, and not throw it all out, because acoustics are acoustics.
Mm-hmm.
But these speakers do behave a little bit differently. They have different characteristics, so there's kind of an adaptation period to kind of figure out what they want to build, and then how do they build it with this new speaker technology. So that first product is always the hardest, but then once they kind of dial it in,
Mm-hmm.
then everything kind of flows from there.
If viewers on the channel wanted to learn more about this technology, what would the next best step for them be, other than us creating more follow-up content about it?
I mean, we're trying to generate more content on our own, for educational purposes and awareness purposes. So we've got the start of some content out there that you can find at xmems.com. And we've been working with avenues like yourselves to try to get more of this information out there. I get probably at least 2 emails a week from just a member of the public saying, "Hey, I'm reading about this. I'm a 30-year wearer of hearing aids, and this sounds really compelling. And where do I get it?"
Right. Take my money.
Yeah, right.
I wish I could say, call up Starkey, call up GN, and ask for this part number. We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there, but we're not quite there yet.
If I'm understanding, kind of the integration of the speaker appropriately, it doesn't sound like it's going to be something that could be, previous generation compatible either.
Well, I think in general it will be. I think a lot of the core electronics in a hearing aid, for the most part, will be unchanged. What happens in the digital signal processor in terms of how they tweak and tune the frequency response, that might change, but the core electronics are going to be basically the same. I think what will change a little bit is maybe a little bit of the acoustics for how they integrate the speaker, into the ear canal. But for the most part, the electronics will be unchanged.
Well, I will say that there's 0% chance that these manufacturers come up and like, "Hey, we just created a new receiver using this technology. Go ahead and pop it on your old hearing aid and get a firmware update." Like 0% chance of that happening.
I mean, at least not out of the gate.
Right? Like, it's going to be a lot of like, "Hey, here's a new amazing feature that we have with this new hearing aid that we're launching."
They want to sell a new hearing aid.
Totally,
Yeah,
and I get that. Because there's going to be a lot of time and money in the research and development of how to include these in their technology. So I do understand that concept. That doesn't happen for free, right? So they have to be able to make it worth their time to invest in bringing on a new piece of tech like this and making it work with their hearing aids, and then potentially completely changing how maybe not completely changing, but changing to some degree how we approach a hearing aid fitting too. So there's training and education that would go along with that too, and a lot of training and education for new devices when they come out is from the manufacturer who knows how that product integrates and works with their tech.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to interview you at all, but I mean, a question I've had is, I guess, as an audiologist, how much reign and freedom are you given over altering the frequency response for your individual customers?
It very much depends on the manufacturer that you're going with. It depends on the technology level that you have inside your devices. So no matter what the hearing aid looks like, you have top tier, second tier, third tier, sometimes even fourth and fifth tier technology. And within that as you go down in tech level, it takes features and customizations away from us when we are doing the fitting. One of those things that it takes away is our control over the frequency response. It gives us only a certain amount of handles to be able to program a hearing aid to a prescription, and the further down in tech level you go, the fewer handles you get.
Yeah.
So some of the manufacturers have 20, 22 frequency handles that we can manipulate. Some have 10, even in their top tier technology, they only have 10. So it's very variable.
Still, that's not bad. But I mean, one thing that we've noticed, playing with these speakers for 3+ years, is they take equalization extremely well.
Okay.
nothing's infinitely tweakable, but these things respond to different EQs extremely well. So
I want to play with it so badly.
hopefully we give you all the knobs and dials you need to really kind of dial it in for each customer.
Now we'll get a little deeper into this, right? So the dirty little secret out there, one of the dirty little secrets inside of the hearing aid industry is that like they'll say that you have a frequency response out to 9,000 hertz with some of these premium level technologies, and you're not actually getting that inside the ear canal. So they might be able to show in a lab that they're able to like, look, we got a decibel of gain at 9,000 hertz, which is going to do virtually nothing for you, right? Yeah. So that's kind of like when, in terms of free reign, I just gave a talk at a conference here recently, and one of the audiologists in the audience was like, oh, well, we can already get out to 9,000 hertz. And I'm like, well, like, I see where you're coming from. They give you an adjustment handle out to 9,000 hertz, but you're not actually getting anything useful out there. This potentially changes the game for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, compared to a 1 kilohertz reference, we'll give you upwards of 30 dB gain, you know, out beyond 10 kilohertz.
Yeah, so that's a big deal.
That's like, that's on near infinite huge shaping and cutting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That would absolutely be a game changer too for a lot of, you know, one of the things with hearing loss is that, you know, higher frequencies are often harder to adapt to and things like that. But when you can tolerate out to that level, we can start to reach people's prescriptive targets that are, you know, having more severe and profound hearing losses into those high frequency ranges. But if there's someone who can tolerate and gets benefit from it, to be able to provide that, I mean, me as an audiologist who also happens to be a perfectionist when I am meeting people's prescriptions with their hearing aids, that would just, you know, change the game for a lot of people as well, especially in, you know, the natural sounding of being able to amplify out to 10,000 hertz, for example.
You know, and having it and not needing it is one thing too. My goal always is when we're programming a hearing aid, you hit out to as high of a frequency response as you possibly can in relation to their prescription. And if they can't tolerate it, or if they don't tolerate it well, then you can always remove, right? But you can't add if you don't have the ability to add.
Yeah,
right?
Boosting never works.
Right.
You want to be in a position to cut. You know, that's natural. Boosting's artificial.
Yeah, absolutely. The hearing aid manufacturers, you were talking about our ability to manipulate like frequency response and things like that. Certain hearing aid manufacturers give usually a 3 to 5 band equalizer inside of the apps that people have to use. So there is some level of personalized customization with that. It'd be interesting to know, like, for literally what we were just listening to. Dr. Beck, you were talking about with your AirPods Pro 2 that you have to trick the system with a hearing loss, all right, or you manipulate your audiogram basically inside of your iPhone to make it give it less bass, right? Yes. But you don't really get that good of an ability to manipulate in a consumer electronic.
My husband had the first generation of AirPods. I then had the first generation of AirPods Pro, and then I recently upgraded to AirPods Pro 2 because everybody said that, you know, the bass got so much better, and it did. I happen to be of the belief that they went maybe a little bit too far to where I actually find it muddies a lot of the sound, which, you know, if you're familiar with acoustics, you know, too much bass actually drowns out all of that good high frequencies that you would get from, you know, the rest of the song that you're listening to. And so I found that and then if you don't know that this is an option inside your AirPods Pro, go into your phone. You can go and enter an audiogram, which is a hearing test, and you can actually tell the hearing test that you have better low frequency hearing than you might actually have. And that actually dropped a lot of the bass off so that I could actually hear the rest of the song well. Yep. But even still, I find that, you know, it is muddy when I'm listening to it.
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to the old adage. I mean, if they're trying to cater to the consumer average, it's all about the bass.
Right, yeah.
But
there's a song about that?
There it is, yes. Many trainer for everybody's curious.
But I mean, you hit the nail on the head because you know, certainly our exposure to the consumer electronics side of the business, just, you know, the first thing they're trying to focus on is the bass. But we're kind of seeing a little bit of a correction now because, you know, for active noise cancellation in these earbuds, a lot of that is low frequency energy. So they've actually had to up-tune the dynamic drivers in these earbuds for noise cancellation. So the overhead and the headroom in these speakers to produce bass is quite enormous. They can really pump bass, But what we found through like 2 or 3 generations now of ANC earbuds is that they've tuned those drivers so much for the low end for ANC that they've lost the mids and the treble. So now we've seen a trend to now try to recapture that, because I think consumers are now starting to realize that it isn't all about the bass. You want that balanced sound profile.
I think it's one of those things where, you know, you always want something that you don't have. And so we didn't have, you know, maybe all of that bass that we were looking for. And now that we have it, we realize that it comes with some unforeseen consequences as well. And so, you know, trying to now, you know, tackle the new challenge that we all created.
Yeah, but to go under the hood a little bit, you know, back to your earlier point with, you know, those 3 or 5 band equalizers, you know, today's hearing aids and consumer earbuds, the digital signal processor in these earbuds is enormously powerful. They can have 30 band EQ in there. They are very capable of 30 band EQ, but the manufacturers just choose to expose, you know, bass, mid-range, treble to you. So the technology is capable, the electronics are capable, but I don't know if they're trying to dumb it down for the average consumer.
I think you hit it on the nose.
Yeah. I mean,
the capability is there.
Well, and what I've found too is that, you know, when people do try to go in to use the equalizer that is even in their hearing aids and they're playing around with it, the knowledge required oftentimes to be able to know how to manipulate to achieve that, you know, your goal. I mean, there's a reason we went to school for as long as we did, always just talking about sound and the physics of sound and how we perceive sound and what the brain does with it after that. They're often like, yeah, no, I couldn't make it any better, and I tried, but I don't know what I'm missing, and then I'll make, you know, 3 tweaks because I know what their goal is and then how to accomplish that. So, you know, the average consumer doesn't know what to do with it most of the time.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a reason why the manufacturers have done what they've done, because you do have to simplify it. Because I've played with a 30 band equalizer. You know, my team,
so fun.
My team lives in biquad filters, shelf filters, you know, things that I can't really know how to manipulate that well. So I personally can be dangerous with a 30 band equalizer.
Right.
Totally.
I'm more likely to mess something up. So you know, for me, I'd probably fit in that area. Just give me 3 and I'll figure it out. But you don't have full control, and you'll never really get it dialed in the way you want to.
you really nailed it with that, because hearing aid manufacturers, not only will they limit it for the consumer, so the patients that are being fit with these hearing aids, they'll actually limit stuff for providers. Because providers, if you don't have a really refined understanding of what you're doing with those adjustments inside, and I'm talking not just the equalizer that we're playing with, I'm talking about the digital features and everything. If you don't have a good grasp of that, you can actually make the experience for the hearing aid user worse. And so what'll typically happen is that when you go in and you fit a pair of hearing aids and you're programming them, having a lot of equalizer bands is great, because then you can match their prescriptive targets very precisely, which I'm a huge believer of. But after that, what happens is that you end up chunking it down much further, right? And you almost like, it's almost like you're adjusting 3 bands at that point, right? You take your highs, your mids, and your lows, and then you make bold adjustments to that to see what their perception is. But you're never going to like, you know what, the things you're reporting sounds like 2700 hertz. Let me go in and adjust that one.
Well, I won't say never.
Oh yeah, I should never say never, right? And it's funny,
But
like
that's a rare occurrence,
right?
of
So
course.
Dr. Cook and I, we were working with a patient who actually goes and watches live performances all the time, and was really struggling with the losing, I don't know, what were they losing, like the trumpets and stuff like that.
Something like
So
that.
we literally go and we look up, okay, what's the frequency response of a trumpet? And then we go in and we're like, okay, how do we want to manipulate this? And if you don't have the bands to be able to kind of separate it out enough to be able to manipulate that, you can run into issues. But that is like few and far between, and I would say that 99% of audiologists wouldn't go that far to manipulate that. So I hate to say it, but some of your tech that you're working on will go underutilized heavily.
But not underappreciated.
Right, yeah.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure as people's audiograms, change over time, it's not by leaps and bounds. It's changing very minutely, and having control over gain and Q and things like that allow you to make those intricate changes that keep it dialed in.
Absolutely.
But that's expert level stuff.
I always talk about, like, there's always stuff happening behind the scenes from technology development and stuff that we just don't see. And a lot of people who use either consumer electronics or hearing aids, they probably when they're thinking about the creation of all this, they're not thinking about all the time and effort. I mean, you're talking since 2018, the company was formed. Obviously, the ideas of it, were there before the company was formed. And as of us recording this right now, it's almost to the very end of 2023. And so we're looking at 5 years or so of development, and there's still no, mainstream technology, or correct me if I'm wrong, there's no like massive adoption of this technology right now.
We're at the kind of the beginning of that hockey stick.
Yeah.
So we've had a couple of hi-fi audio product releases over the past few months. We do actually have a PSAP in Asia that launched a few months ago. So kind of this trickling into the hearing assistance device space. But 2 days ago we made a joint announcement with Creative Technology out of Singapore. So they've just announced their TWS earbud, kind of like their
So not an OTC, but an earbud.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, consumer earbud.
Gotcha.
So that's launching later this year. So we're kind of at that beginning of the hockey stick where, again, all the major manufacturers have our technology. They're designing it in, and those products will start to trickle out over the coming quarters.
That's cool.
Well,
So this is kind of an early look.
it's an early look, but I think too, there is, a product that's going to be launched in the near future. And I think that if the response is anything like the response I had when listening to it, I think that it's going to become very apparent to these larger companies that they need to get on this train, and they need to get on it pretty quickly so that it's something that they beat everybody else to. I mean, it's all about the competition, right?
Yeah. I mean, hearing is believing,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got this product in my ears every day, and I do listen to legacy products as well, and the difference is clear, and I'll never go back.
Yeah.
Got you spoiled.
Well, you have the fortunate ability to not go back at this
Right?
point.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm biased, but,
Yeah.
but still, I mean, the difference is obvious, and I think others will feel it too.
Well, that's cool. Well, it's good to know that all the manufacturers, the ones that I care about in the major hearing aid space, already have access to it and are obviously working on it behind the scenes as we speak. They probably don't need any more encouragement from me.
More is always welcome.
Right. But I tend to focus on speaking to the users of hearing aids, and anytime that I identify something that I think is going to be big, I tend to talk about it a lot. And when new technologies come out inside the hearing aid space, inside the prescription hearing aid space, I'm usually telling people, you're probably not going to notice massive differences from one generation to the next. And back when Bluetooth came out, like direct Bluetooth came out, 2013 or so, there's very few things that come out that are like, this is such a game changer that if you bought hearing aids 6 months ago, you would want to consider upgrading literally right now, right? And I think that this has the potential to be one of those things. Dramatic change, right? And frequency response and perception of quality of sound. I think that that's going to be a huge driver for hearing aid adoption, which you talked about. We want those adoption rates to go up because people need to treat their hearing loss. We just had research come out here recently, mid-July 2023 from Johns Hopkins and Dr. Frank Lin, showing that individuals who are at risk for cognitive decline, a 48% reduction in the rate of that decline when they treat their hearing loss. So, having better technology for people to use inside of hearing aids is going to be critical for the long-term health of human beings
Absolutely.
as time goes on. And so it's just really exciting to see that there are companies like this that you work with that are creating technologies to kind of usher in this next, game-changing tech. It'll just be interesting to see which one comes first. Is it going to be Auracast that I've talked about a lot, or is it going to be more of the solid-state MEMS speakers?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the speaker as we know it hasn't changed in 100 years.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Auracast, and there's a lot of effort around lossless, wireless lossless with Bluetooth and high-res audio. As the content gets higher resolution, trying to get that content to resolve over legacy speaker technologies, you won't get the full effect and the full value out of the content. You basically need the equivalent of an HD speaker, and that's what we think we've built.
Yeah, no, I'm super jazzed about it. Is there anything else that you feel like you'd like to share with what you guys got going on?
Well, I think maybe a little bit more on Skyline.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
talk about it.
So, Skyline kind of came about, getting back to our speaker really quick, our speaker has another unique quality that we didn't touch on yet, which is the diaphragm is actually vented. So as the MEMS is moving up and down, the diaphragm's moving up and down, there's basically micron level etches or slits in the diaphragm where from the front of the earbud to the back, air can flow through the speaker. And that's typically a no-no in most speakers. You basically have a wall. The diaphragm is a wall.
Right.
For the compliance of our membrane, we actually put little microscopic etches in there. And what we had noticed through our own listening experience with these products, our engineers are tuning with these speakers for hours a day. They didn't notice the ear canal pressurization that they were accustomed to with other earbud technology. So as we started to talk to customers about this vented diaphragm to improve long-term listening comfort, we had our customers bring something else to us. They said, well, could those slits help with occlusion effects? And us kind of coming into this new, we were like, well, what's occlusion effects? So we obviously educated ourselves pretty quickly and quickly determined that those slits, while they're really good for relieving buildup of pressure in the ear canal, the opening wasn't significant enough to really address occlusion effects.
Right.
So that's how the idea of Skyline, our dynamic vent technology, came about, saying, oh, well, if we just make more vent and kind of make that its own discrete component, could that address occlusion effects? So we kind of took the concept to the TWS earbud space. We took it to our leading hearing aid customers and said, what's the spec? What do you need? And got some great guidance from them, and thus came Skyline.
Where did Skyline come in the development time frame in terms of like that versus the speakers?
The speakers came first, absolutely. So that's how we had these conversations. But we were already out with our Montera device.
Okay.
I think at the time we were getting ready to launch our Cowl device when we started to have these discussions and explore the concept of a vent. And that's where we're at today. We announced Skyline last year, and now we've got that in the hands of customers worldwide.
Cool. So about 4 years after the first MEMS speaker?
No, I would say probably about 2 years.
2 years after. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Originally, we had the vent and the speaker on the same piece of silicon. And then customers said, we want more vent, and we want the vent separate from the speaker, because where you place the vent is not always where you'd want to place the speaker.
Right.
So that's why we created Skyline as its own component, freedom of placement to maximize the performance.
Let's talk about the occlusion effect a little bit more, just in case anyone watching is not familiar with that. This concept where if you plug up your ears and you talk, you end up getting your voice bone conducted through your jaw into your ear canals. It literally cannot escape, and it vibrates your eardrum. And if you have good enough low frequency hearing, you hear that, right? And obviously, if you get into more of the severe to profound levels, like you're not hearing the occlusion effect because it's not loud enough for you to be able to hear. So the technology that currently exists with this inside of the hearing aid space, we're familiar with the Activent from one of the major hearing aid manufacturers, opening and closing almost like a plunger effect. And I think it plays at around 80 dB or so, the sound of that, which is rather jarring when you first hear it. I would say that people end up getting used to it, to where if it's opening and closing enough, their brain kind of tunes it out to some degree. But how is what you're talking about with the Skyline different than that Activent? Yeah,
so again, this uses the same MEMS technology and piezo technology as our speakers. So essentially, to simplify it, it's actually just two flaps, two silicon flaps that are it's a differential vent. So one's going up, one's going down when we fully open, and then they come back together to close and fully seal. So you've got this kind of barn door that can swing dynamically and open and close based on the situation the user's in.
Is it fast enough to do it, like literally in between, like I'm talking, now I stop talking, closes?
Yeah, it's milliseconds.
Yeah.
It's very fast, and that speed is adaptable. We have We even have, hunting and public safety people looking at this vent for gunshot protection.
Well, that was my next question was, I wonder if this would also be applicable for, active noise, canceling when you are talking about, hunting, shooting, responses to gun noise.
Yeah, so we can close extremely fast for that use case, or we can have, for me personally, as I experience the vent, I kind of want to know it's there sometimes. So I actually it's personal preference. I actually like kind of a slower close. I can gradually hear the situation changing, and that's my feedback. It's not a jarring click. It's just kind of a slow close of that vent, and it gives you that mental feedback to know that it's working, and it's kind of reassuring. But I think everyone will maybe want it a little bit differently.
With everything, especially if we're talking in the hearing aid space, there are different, people who like, more fast acting things like compression or, other things like that. So I'm sure that there's going to be a range of what most people are going to like. But again, that goes back to our conversation about the product research and, focus groups testing the product to know what exactly that's going to be. And then again, how much control over it are they going to give to the provider or to the patient on their own. So
yeah, and the more we talk to our customers about the vent, the more applications we're discovering. Occlusion effects is what we designed it for.
Yeah.
So we had to nail that immediately. But we have different customers looking at it for different use cases. Those that are doing active noise cancellation, they want to partner it with the vent. The vent's giving you good passive noise isolation. It's closing that door and physically blocking sound. So you kind of combine the digital active noise cancellation with the analog passive noise cancellation to build a better product. We have customers looking at this for a more natural pass-through mode. Because your AirPods have that digitized pass-through mode. The mic's detecting things, digitally amplifying them and sending it out through the speaker. But there's an unnaturalness to it.
There is, yep.
And now if you've got just this physical door that can be open and closed, you just naturally let in the voice.
Yeah.
Now maybe with someone with hearing loss, they benefit from the amplification of the digital method. But for those without hearing loss, maybe the more natural approach is the way to go.
Well, I think there's a benefit to the natural approach with individuals with hearing loss as well. I mean, we literally make decisions to keep people's ear canals open, all the time. If they have good low frequency hearing, I don't see why that would change necessarily if we had the ability to leave it naturally open without the digitization of that effect. Streaming also is another big thing too. So you had mentioned yourself when we were talking a little bit about the speakers that if you open up the ear canal, you start getting roll off in those lows and losing that, even though you're able to maintain the highs to a degree. But this would actually serve as a use case for that too, where you want to have that barn door, so to speak, closed when you're streaming.
Yeah, you get all that bass effect back, and again, it's a controllable leak. So if you fully open it, you're going to lose that bass effect, and maybe fully closed, which would give you the best bass response, does bring back some of those occlusion effects that, depending on the situation, could be unwelcome. But again, this is kind of an analog door, so you can just leak it just a little bit where you can maintain the bass effect, but you get a little bit of leak for that comfort. So that configurability, I think, will benefit the consumer.
Mike, thank you so much for coming out here and taking the time to share us this amazing technology that you guys have. I personally think it's going to completely change what's going to happen in the hearing aid space. And then for people who are interested in consumer audio, I think it's going to have a pretty dramatic effect there too, and maybe even before we see it in the hearing aid space. But if you guys want to learn more about xMEMS and everything that they have going on, make sure that you go and check out their website. I believe it's xMEMS.com. And check that out. Of course, we're going to be making a lot more content here on this channel. So if you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button with notification bell for more content, and we'll see you next time.